Greetings collectors and welcome to today's retro game review. For those of you that have followed the channel for a while, you'll know that I have a certain love of the Sega Saturn, and in particular the Japanese Sega Saturn. As such, from time to time I import the odd game or two. Okay, hundreds, but that's not the point. Every now and again I'll arrange a bulk shipment from Akihabara, going after those games that I'm really after, but at times also picking up games to flesh out the collection. A few years ago now, I picked up this game, All Japan Pro Wrestling featuring Virtua. Yes, that is its real title. I spun up the disc, played for a few minutes, and wrote this one off at the time. It's just another in a sea of wrestling games. However, I don't mind admitting that I was wrong. I saw this one in the stock the other day and gave it another go. How was I so wrong about this game? On a second play with fresh eyes, this may just be one of the best wrestling games of all time. Even if Japanese wrestling really isn't your kind of thing, stay around to see what this game has to offer. So I'm going to have to preface this episode with the obvious. I'm a big fan of Japanese culture, in particular its gaming scene, which is why you'll often see so many episodes dedicated to the subject on the channel. Inevitably though, my interest spun out into other delights that the Japanese culture has to offer. There's the anime, gashapon, the business culture, weird and wonderful cosplay, their obsession with KFC, and of course their games industry, which is second to none. One area that never really struck a chord with me though was Japanese wrestling, not of the sumo variety, but of the pro wrestling scene. Think WWF, but with more angry businessmen shouting at the ring. So when I picked up All Japan Pro Wrestling featuring Virtua, it was more for the novelty of the cameo appearances of Virtua fighters Wolf Hawkfield and Jeffry McWild. You see, the game is what I can only describe as a serious attempt at the genre, rather than the other generic polygon fighters that were doing the rounds back in the day. The game features 10 of Japan's pro wrestlers. This is essentially a licensed game, but with 2 Virtua Fighter characters thrown in for good measures. It's a bit like playing FIFA and having Soccer Kid turn up, or Magic Marco for that matter. Despite the slightly odd premise and my less than perfect knowledge of Japanese pro wrestling, I'd like to explain why this is a must-have fighting game for Sega Saturn owners. For someone whose main forays into wrestling games were a few rounds on various N64 releases, Pro Wrestling for the Master System, yes, awesome game by the way, and of course WWF WrestleMania on the Commodore Amiga, it might seem strange that I would recommend this one, but I thoroughly do. First, select your wrestler from the roster. For the aficionados and westerners, you're likely to perhaps know some of the wrestlers such as Stan Hansen, Steve Williams, Gary Albright, aka Dr. Death, and Johnny Ace. As all of these wrestled in other leagues such as the WCW and UFW before their appearances on the Japanese pro wrestling scene. Then there's this guy that takes up 4 profile spaces, Giant Baba. More on him later. For entertainment though, I rather enjoy choosing the Virtua Fighter characters as they are more familiar to me, my comfort blanket if you will in this new strange world of Japanese pro wrestling. Each match starts with a ring walk and it does feel reminiscent of a real wrestling match. The camera angles, the intro music and crowd cheering, it's a pretty decent offering. It has to be said that this game was released back in 1997 as part of the 25th anniversary of the AJPW League. However, it doesn't necessarily show off the best graphics that the Sega Saturn had to offer. The crowd is, well yes, it's basically a stretch bitmap, a low detailed one at that. We had already seen much better implementations in almost every other fighting game prior. As for the characters, well here I'm a bit divided. The real life characters actually look fairly decent, and it's definitely possible to see their likenesses to their headshots. Jeffry also looks fairly decent and fits in well. Wolf on the other hand, he certainly looks different to the most recent Virtua Fighter 2 model at the time, losing some shading and texture detail. If I was being cynical, I'd also say that the developers simply mapped some pre-existing textures over a generic wireframe. But hey, he does look like Wolf, so that is a bonus. On with the wrestling. Where to start? If you're expecting Virtua Fighter, then you will be disappointed as I was when I first picked the game up. I would be mercilessly beaten down by the computer opponent in all kinds of elaborate ways. By the time the opponent was climbing the ring and jumping on me, well, I knew I was failing badly. It was as if I was playing in a different fighting language. Combos like Virtua Fighter? No, that doesn't work. Single special hits? Well, they are very few and far between. So, what's the answer? Well, it's a bit like my experience with Last Bronx. You can't play it as you would a Virtua Fighter or Dead or Alive affair. This isn't an arcade beat-em-up. The penny dropped for me in Last Bronx when I dug deeper into the gameplay mechanics. It was all about the dance. It was about the massive damage dealt by combos at the risk of getting sucked into the opponent's game. Once I'd learnt the rhythm and the moves, Last Bronx became one of my favourite tactical fighters of all time. All Japan Pro Wrestling has its very own specific dance. If Last Bronx was an emotional high-energy tango, pro wrestling is more of a choreographed waltz. It's best to think of it as a series of thrilling set pieces. The steps go as follows. Step 1. Attack. This generally involves a few well-aimed slaps or even a boot to the face. Step 2. Hold. Now that you've softened up your opponent, they may even begin to feel dazed. Use this as your chance to hold them, and then swiftly move on to Step 3. Step 3. Throw. These are your big hitters. You've got to the stage where you can overpower your opponent enough to pick them up and cave their head into the ring. Satisfying. But there's more to pro wrestling than this. Ultimately, a winner is decided by either a 3-count pin, or a devastating injury to one of the wrestlers. Each of these outcomes seem rather straightforward, but the path there is actually a little more involved. Take the injury stoppage rule for example. You're most likely to inflict one of these by your special move. However, to get to the position of powering up the special move, you're going to need to be fighting for a while to build up the gauge. See these yellow bars here? Build these up and let loose that power move when you can. If you can land a devastating blow, you'll see an on-screen infographic informing you of the injury. Cool, his neck is breaking. In this case, my opponent is hell-bent on breaking my arm until I submit. Method 2, the 3-count pin, is what most of us will recognise from a traditional wrestling match. When your opponent is down, simply pin them. Or, if you're getting the hang of the game, use one of the more elaborate pin moves. In terms of the moveset for the Virtua Fighter characters, expect a bit of a departure from the main series. There's no crazy jump distances or extreme combos. However, much of the moveset has been retained and blended into a more realistic mould. It's been translated in a very sympathetic way that makes the characters feel very familiar, yet also part of this more gritty world. However, beating your opponent to a pulp is only half the story. Half the dance, if you will. You see, this is wrestling, and as I mentioned earlier, much more of a choreographed entertainment. At the top of the screen, you may have noticed a blue bar. This represents the mood of the audience. Who are they getting behind and cheering for? They seem to love Akiyama as he goes to work on me, but the tide can always swing. Having the crowd behind you makes the opponent much easier to pin, so you should do everything you can to pull off a variety of moves and, if necessary, showboat for the attention of the crowd. It's an interesting mechanic and prevents you from just button bashing or using the same techniques. The crowd want a show, and you must give it to them. It would take me a while to go over everything included in the gameplay here, but it has everything you could hope for in terms of depth. Stuck in a grapple? Then mash those buttons to pull off a reversal. You can throw your opponent into the ropes and land swift vengeance. You can even go outside of the ring to inflict pain in front of the crowds. Or jump off the ropes to please the crowd. It's at this moment when I broke this guy's back that I knew I was hooked on the game. All in all, this is a fantastic game once you get to know the rules and the moves. And oh my, those moves. It's not uncommon to receive a move sheet in Japanese fighting games, but pro wrestling? Well, it's more of a Bible. Just look at this fold-out poster. It shows all the special moves and grapple progressions. See here, lead in with a B button grapple. Then forward A, finished off with a back and C to perform a DDT. Or what about this little gem? B to grapple, B to grapple further. From there you have 4 options, perhaps A to attack. Then C to end the combo with a throw. It's all very comprehensive, and once you sink in a bit of time learning the movesets, the game actually becomes very satisfying. This is indeed a wall chart. Oh, and it's double-sided. So, is there anything not to like about the game? Well, as mentioned, the background is a little lackluster, but on balance the action is on the wrestlers, so I can easily forgive this. Especially with the knowledge that really this game is more of a showcase to the intricate wrestling move system. The music? Surprisingly good. Each wrestler comes out to their own track, and generally it's very decent, especially for a sports game. The presentation is rather decent in terms of a physical release. Plenty of bio information, as well as the aforementioned moveset, help and general basic introductions to see you on your way. This is a weighty package, and I think it has everything that the fans of the sport would want to see in here. The roster of characters? Well, it's varied. The models are well put together for the most part. Certainly nowhere near the best on the system, but the gameplay seems to override the shortcomings for the most part. If you can accommodate a bit of polygon clipping here and there, then you'll have no major gripes with the character models. And that's perhaps as the game was created using motion capture techniques from the wrestlers involved in the game. The movesets seem genuine, and although pro wrestling tends to be over theatrical in the first place, this actually plays very well into the style of the game. You'll also be able to squeeze out 60 frames per second from this one on the original Japanese hardware, and I found generally the flow of the gameplay was very pleasing. So, overall, a rather solid title. Oh yes, there is one absolutely glaring issue in the game. Remember this guy, Giant Baba? He is real, 209 centimeters, that's 6 foot 10 inches, and one of the founders of the AJPW. In short, he's a tall legend. There was even a time he teamed up with Andre the Giant. True story. Anyway, he's a bit of an icon for the sport, and much deserved too from what I understand. So, just what happened here? Firstly, his profile image. He definitely looks like he's straining hard for something. Quite a departure from some of the other more flattering headshots on display. Anyway, it's all about the gameplay. You'll notice as Giant Baba enters the ring, his scale causes several issues. See here as he tries to pass through the ropes. The polygon clipping is so extreme I think the developers just admitted defeat with the hopes that gamers would skip this part. It's not an issue in terms of gameplay at all, but it does seem a little out of place, seeing as they could have perhaps changed the animation to him perhaps stepping over the ropes. I'm nitpicking here a bit though. However, the clipping also becomes an issue when in combat. See here as his scale compared to the other wrestlers leads to what I can only describe as a polygon clipping nightmare. It's not game breaking, but certainly jarring when the rest of the game has been so well polished. Thirdly is the most obvious, Baba's speed. He's ridiculously slow. I mean really slow. He actually struggles to walk across the ring to the opponent, and his attack seems so dialed in you'll definitely want to steer well clear of using him on your first playthrough. He is very powerful though, should you land a throw. Perhaps the other side of the coin though is that he is rather fun to play against. After a few matches in the one-player game, Giant Baba will call you out in a cutscene, no doubt offering to smack you down. However, his lumbering form makes him a real target if you know what you're doing. Here I managed to beat him out of the ring and then cave his head into the ringside for some critical damage to his skull. And then again. And then again. And then once more for good measure, making sure to break his neck. Whilst it is very satisfying, you can't help thinking that in real life Baba should be more of a boss character. Instead he comes off far more as a novelty due to his implementation. Ironically, far more so than the virtual characters of Wolf and Jeffry. It's a shame, as a bit more thought around the execution here could have added another level of gameplay variety. I'm fairly sure the conversations at Sega went something like this. You must include Giant Baba. Well, okay, but it won't look good. Do it anyway, it's his game. With my gripes around Giant Baba aside, All Japan Pro Wrestling is an absolutely fantastic game. Until recently, I certainly didn't see myself as someone that would recommend a rather unfamiliar retro wrestling title, exclusive to the Sega Saturn of all places, but here we are. My first impressions were quite wrong, and I'm pleased to have given this one a second chance. It's a very well presented package, both physically and in-game. The move system has depth, and the learning curve is gentle enough to get you hooked and make you want to learn the more complex movesets. As an experience, it's genuinely fun to play, and it will take you some time to see all of the moves and learn all of the opponent's strengths and weaknesses. Even if you're not too familiar with the sport, I think that there's something about this game that makes it accessible. It's not an all-out brawler, and its slightly slower, controlled tactical pace makes it stand out in a very positive light. So next time you're importing from Japan, look out for this one. It's not yet prohibitively expensive or too challenging to track down. Although I've not played a great deal of wrestling games, All Japan Pro Wrestling featuring Virtua has quickly risen to be my favourite of the 32-bit era. It just goes to show that there's always one more hidden gem to find on the Sega Saturn. Until next time, happy gaming.
ジャーマンの体勢、強引に持っていく。ここからまだ手を止めない。さらに引っこ抜いた。まだ行く赤鬼オブライト。鬼のようなジャーマンだ。カウント3、これは返せませんでした。
Hello again, I hope you enjoyed today's show and thank you for the view. Remember, you can always comment, like, subscribe and find us on the social media sites below. Happy collecting!